In the vast expanses of Tanzania's Serengeti National Park, a relentless drought reigned. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the once green plains into a parched desert. The earth was covered in deep cracks, and rivers and ponds had dried up, leaving only a dry crust of mud. The grass that once rustled in the wind now crunched under the paws of animals searching for at least a drop of water. Herds of zebra and antelope had wandered far north, following the last signs of moisture, and the predators that were left behind struggled to survive in this harsh reality. In the middle of this lifeless savanna lay a baby leopard, pressed against the cold body of his mother. His mother, exhausted by hunger and thirst, had died 2 days ago, leaving the cub alone. The cub, still too young to hunt on his own, did not understand why she was no longer moving. His large, dust-red eyes stared at the hot sky, and his weak, plaintive cries echoed in the emptiness, muffled only by the chirping of the cicadas. He licked his mother's dry ears, as if hoping that she would wake up, but her body remained motionless. Hunger and thirst tormented the small body. His fur, once shiny, was now covered in dust and clumps, and his ribs protruded under the skin. He had not left his mother for 2 days, but his strength was exhausted. The survival instinct, a thin thread holding him in this world, made him stand up. Staggering on weak legs, he said goodbye to his mother, casting one last glance at her body, and trudged forward, guided by the faint smell of dampness that wafted from afar. The sun burned his back, every step was torched, sand and dust clogged his eyes, and thirst squeezed his throat like an invisible noose. He fell, got up, and walked again, clinging to the fragile hope of finding water. The sky above him was cloudless, and the horizon trembled from the heat, as if mocking his despair. On the 3rd day he came across a tiny pool of muddy water stuck in a crack in the ground. He lapped it greedily, but it was too little to quench his thirst or stifle his hunger. By the 4th day the leopard was at his wit's end. His body had become alarmingly thin, every bone showing through his skin, crusted with dirt and scabs. He collapsed under a withered acacia tree, unable to go any further. His breathing was weak and ragged. His eyes were slowly closing. He no longer screamed. He had no strength left. The wind swirled dust around his small body, and overhead, vultures were already gathering, their shadows sliding across the ground, heralding the end. But fate decreed otherwise. That day, a patrol of Serengeti rangers was driving through the savannah. A young woman named Amina Kilua, who worked on the animal rescue team, carefully examined the surroundings through binoculars. Her heart sank at the sight of the land devastated by drought. But she did not lose hope of finding those who could still be helped. Suddenly, she noticed something under a tree, a small lump, almost merged with the dusty earth. "Stop," she shouted to the driver, and the jeep abruptly braked. Amina and her partner, Joseph, rushed to the tree. Coming closer, they saw the leopard, barely breathing. His eyes were half closed, and his body was shaking from weakness. Amina sank to her knees. Her heart sank with pity. She took a water bottle and a small plastic cup from her backpack, poured some liquid, and held it to the cub's muzzle. His dry tongue moved weakly as it touched the water. He began to lick, slowly but greedily. "Hold on, baby," Amina whispered, her voice shaking with excitement. Joseph watched silently, ready to help. Amina carefully picked up the leopard, feeling his hot, exhausted body tremble in her arms. They wrapped him in a soft blanket to protect him from the sun and loaded him into the jeep. On the way back, Amina continued to give him water, drop by drop, keeping him alive. When they arrived at the Serengeti Rescue Center, Amina wasted no time in rushing into the veterinary unit, holding the leopard in her arms. Joseph threw open the doors and called the veterinarian on duty, Dr. Elias Mantwe. Elias, an experienced specialist, immediately began examining the leopard. He noted severe dehydration, exhaustion, and skin infections caused by parasites. The condition was critical, but there was still a chance to save him. "We need to act quickly," Elias said, preparing an IV with a nutrient solution. Amina stood nearby, holding the leopard's paw and quietly whispering words of encouragement to him. She stroked him to make him feel safe. The IV began to work, and soon the baby's breathing became more even. His eyes closed, but this was not a sign of death, but the first peaceful sleep in many days. The next 3 days will be crucial, Elias said, looking at Amina. If he survives them, he has a Amina nodded, her eyes shining with determination. She knew she would not abandon the baby. Over the next few days, Amina stayed close to the leopard. She fed him a special formula through a syringe, monitored his IV, and treated his skin for parasites. Every morning, she brought him fresh water and soft food, patiently coaxing him to try. On the 3rd day, he licked a piece of meat for the first time on his own, and Amina couldn't help but smile. His eyes became brighter, and his movements became a little more confident. Elias handed the leopard over to Amina's full-time care, seeing her devotion. She named the baby Kibo, which means hope in Swahili. Kibo was moved to a special enclosure at the rehabilitation center, where Amina continued to care for him. She brought him toys to stimulate his instincts, and spent hours watching him tentatively play with a rag ball. His growls, weak at first, grew louder, and his fur began to shine like a healthy leopard's. After 2 weeks, Kibo was already confidently standing on his paws. He greedily ate portions of meat, and his eyes, once full of fear, now sparkled with curiosity. Amina began to prepare him for the next stage, returning to the wild. She moved him to a large semi-wild enclosure simulating a savanna, with trees, bushes and artificial shelters. In the enclosure, Amina taught Kibo hunting skill. She hid pieces of meat so that he learned to look for prey, and hung toys to practice his jumping. At first, Kibo was timid, but Amina patiently encouraged him, and soon he began to sneak through the grass, imitating adult leopard. His first attempts were clumsy, but with each passing day he became faster and more accurate. One day, Kibo caught an artificial bait, proudly carrying it in his teeth to Amina. She laughed, feeling her heart fill with pride. Her colleagues at the center said that Kibo was her miracle, and praised her for her tireless care. But Amina knew that soon the time would come to let him go. 3 months later, Kibo had grown into a strong young leopard. His body was muscular, his fur glistened in the sun, and his eyes shone with wild energy. Amina and the ranger team decided he was ready for release into the wild. The enclosure was opened in a remote corner of the Serengeti, where there were antelope and water that had returned with the first rains. On the day of his release, Amina stood outside the enclosure, watching Kibo carefully walk out into freedom. He stopped, turned around and looked at her as if saying goodbye. Then he leaped into the tall grass and disappeared into the savanna. Amina wiped away a tear, knowing she had done everything she could to give him a chance. Kibo's story has become a legend in the Serengeti. She reminded everyone of the power of compassion, and how one woman, believing in the fragility of life, gave a leopard a hope for the future. And somewhere in the savanna, Kibo, now a real hunter, ran under the stars, free and full of life. Thank you for listening to this story. If you liked it, don't forget to support our channel. Like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories about wildlife.